Use your DVD player's remote control to rapidly navigate to any chapter in this video. Here are some important notes for using these videos. This video shows you how we put our aircraft together. This presentation is not reviewed or endorsed by Vans. You need to follow your directions and not rely on our demonstration. Your plans and instructions may have changed since we produced this video. You cannot rely on this video for accuracy or applicability to your project. We assume the viewer has read and is familiar with the Getting Started section of the Builder's Manual. This section outlines the tools and construction practices required to build this kit. For example, we will not repeat the need for proper part deburring and preparation before each step. We do not suggest or endorse any corrosion protection for your aircraft. That decision is a personal choice. We use minimal amounts of primer on contacting services at the owner's request. On all screens throughout the video, in the lower right corner, you will find the page and step number from the Vans Assembly Manual that corresponds to the task being demonstrated on the screen. In addition to using the fast forward button on your DVD player's remote, you can also use the chapter skip key to quickly move throughout the video. Our wing kit came in 2 crates. You're looking at one of the crates, which measures approximately a little over 4 feet by 4 feet square by a little over a foot deep. And in this crate, of course, we have our assembly directions, and then many of the smaller parts, including the ribs for the wings, and those are packed up front here very nicely. What's hard to see right now is underneath all of those parts are the wing skins, and some of them are folded over, as you can see there at the top. And we need to take inventory of everything at this time. We use our checklist sheets to carefully inventory each and every component. And here's the bottom of that crate. You can now see the wing skins which were hiding underneath, and then they wrap around over there at the side. And these are all labeled. The other crate is the long one, about 15.5 feet long by a little less than a foot in each of the other directions. And it contains our wing spars as well as the aileron spars and a number of other components which wouldn't fit into the smaller crate. And here's a look at our wing spars. Notice that they are pretty much completed and finished. In step 1, we want to separate these attach angles by simply snipping them apart and then deburring. We have quite a few of these to do, and that includes also this angle also. In step 2, we want to separate these doublers by snipping them up the middle and then deburring. We have the wing spars laid out on a pair of horses, and we have labeled them so we don't forget which is the left and the right. Step 3 and 4, we're going to take the rib doubler and attach with clecos the second row to the flange on our left spar and attach it, and then we're going to back drill the first holes into the flange. We want to be careful when drilling those holes that we don't mar the web of the spar. In other words, we should either use a long drill bit or a right angle drill to get these holes without scratching this area with our drill. And we're simply going to drill all 6 holes all the way through. And then we will uncleco and set the part aside till later. In step 5, we move to the tip end of the spars and locate the tie-down assemblies, which are already riveted on each spar. And we are instructed to drill each end of these holes to 5/16 an inch down, and then tap them with a tap to 3/8 as per our directions. We'll do that on both spars and each end, so we'll have 4 holes to drill and tap. I will mark my drill bit with a line so I know how far to drill down. Make sure I've drilled far enough and tapped far enough. On page 1303, step 1, we're going to cleco on the angles on both sides of the spar. Here's one already installed. There will be a total of 5 on each side, and the small part points inboard, and they will match up nicely with the holes. And remember, we have one on the other side oriented in exactly the same way, and that will go underneath on the other side and share the same clecos. In addition, we have one more angle at the very tip, and that will be clecoed here at the pre-drilled holes. And this is only on one side. And of course, you can build both spars, both wings, at the same time with each of these procedures, or wait to repeat this all again at a later time. In step 3, we're going to go ahead and rivet the angle at the tip, and in addition, we need to go to the other end of the spar, and this is on the right spar, not the left, but the right spar. We're not going to add a part, but on an existing part, we're going to rivet the open holes located right in here. This is already attached with solid rivets, but we're supposed to rivet in the open holes there. Step 4, we go ahead and rivet all of the angles we just clecoed in place on both spars, and the remaining angle on the other spar at the tip. And then in step 5, we actually rivet in nearly all of the remaining holes that exist as marked on our instructions, found in various locations throughout the spar. And we'll fill in those holes with rivets as prescribed. And these are all pulled or pop rivets. On page 1402, step 1, we're going to take the spar doubler and the spar channel. Now here's the channel. There's two of them, a left and a right. And it's the one with all of the holes and the fork at the end. And in our first step, we want to simply cleco the doubler to the face of the channel. And when we're done, it'll look something like this. Now there's a left and a right, so we want to also label the doubler with a corresponding left or right once we've attached it to the left or right channel. So I have my right and my left. Notice that the doubler goes on the outside of the channel or opposite the flange side. On page 1402, step 2, we need to machine countersink all of the holes in both flanges of our stub spars. Now we have quite a few holes to deal with here, and it will be both the top and the bottom flanges where these holes are located. So we need to set up our drill and countersink. As per our directions, we want to use the 120-degree cutter, which is slightly different than the 100-degree which we normally use. So we loaded that into our cage, and then we want to set the depth, how far it cuts, by adjusting our cage. We're going to do that on a scrap piece of metal. So I drilled a few number 30 size holes in this extrusion and carefully tested and adjusted until I got the depth of the countersink just the way we want it. We make a 1/4 inch hole in a scrap piece of aluminum. That can become our gauge to confirm that the depth of our countersink is just right. Because if it's just right, we should be able to put our gauge over our newly cut hole and just fill up the 1/4 inch hole. In other words, if we're cutting too deep, it will be larger than the hole. If we're not cutting deep enough, it will be smaller than the hole. So we'll use this as a gauge to confirm that we're cutting at the right depth. Once we got our cage set up properly, we can go ahead and countersink our holes. And I also pre-drilled all the holes with my number 30 size drill bit to make sure that the nub of the cutter would fit in nicely. In step 3, we want to countersink the 3 holes in both sides of our assembly. And this will allow us to set a rivet that is flush on both sides. So countersink those 3 and these 3 on both of our assemblies. And there we have it countersunk on both sides. Now in step 4, we're going to rivet the doubler onto the channel. Take note that there are a series of holes, these 3 here and these 2, which will not get riveted at all. The rest of these will be riveted with the domed squeezed rivets, and of course these 3 here will be the countersunk and flush on both sides. And it should look something like this when we're done. And there's our flushed settings on both sides. steps 5 and 6, we're going to take our flapper-on hinge brackets. Now there's a left and a right based on the angle that these are bent out, and we're going to cleco them together, and then we want to rivet them, but noticing our directions, we're only going to rivet up in this part, and we'll use our squeeze riveter. And there are the 8 rivets we set. Now we need to produce 3 more sets of these, exactly like this, and then set them aside for use a little bit later. On page 1402, steps 7 through 10, we have some additional brackets we must prepare. We have these 2, which are a left and a right due to the way the flange goes, and they will be mated together, but in between, and there'll be a bearing that goes in the middle here, we have a piece like this which will go together, and we will press a bearing into the middle, a bearing like this one here, and we can use a socket if necessary to press it into this hole like I have here, and it just has a fit in there that holds it in place. And then one of our halves goes on top of it, and then one on the other side. And if you notice, there's a recess in there that actually holds the bearing, and we just simply sandwich that all together, and that will capture the bearing in the middle. Now, in preparation, we need to countersink these 2 holes. This is going to be on the outside of one side, and then the other bracket on the outside, the corresponding 2 holes will be countersunk, and they'll end up going together like this. And so we'll go ahead then and put all these pieces together with the bearing. We'll cleco this, and then we can go ahead and rivet. And again, 2 countersinks here, 2 countersinks here, and the rest of them will be the standard dome rivet. Here's what it looks like completed. The bearing must be free to move in there, and we have our 2 flush heads, and on the other side. And these 2 rivets, the end that you squeeze fits as close as possible down to the surface as you squeeze them into the machined out area. So that's a double flush rivet. And we need to make a second one of these assemblies. In step 11, we need to separate this part by simply trimming the connecting areas, and also to mark it as the left and the right. And we can tell that by identifying the holes. Notice this hole is far from the end, and this hole is close to the end. And the diagram in our instructions will help us mark one left versus right. On page 1403, step 1, we're going to take one of the hinge assemblies that we put together and cleco it to the spar doubler. And that will go right at this location. And it looks something like that. And of course, we will repeat that for the right side also. In step 2, we are to rivet the most inboard set of rivets right here. In step 3, we're going to now cleco the hinge assembly that we just riveted to the spar web. Now, there's a left and a right, and this is the one that's a good 15 feet long. And we'll cleco the open holes onto the last row of the spar web. In step 4, we're going to take the tip angle and attach this to the other end of the spar web. And this will attach just like this. And the holes will match up and we will cleco. And of course we're repeating all of this for the right spar web also. In step 5, we're now going to rivet the doubler, the hinge assembly, onto the web. We want to make sure that we leave the no rivet zones untouched, which is here and here, and these two here. We'll go ahead and rivet the rest of these as per our directions. On page 1502, step 1, we are to straighten all of our nose ribs by fluting. Now, here's one that I just got from the kit. If you place it on a table, you will notice there is quite a gap. In fact, large enough for me to get my finger under there. Here's a rib that I have fluted, and notice it sits nice and flat on the table. And the difference, of course, is that the rib has, before we flute it, the rib has a bow in it, and so we need to flute in between the holes on the flanges until we get it nice and flat. We will use our fluting pliers like we did in our tail kit, and in between each of the holes give it a gentle squeeze so we put that little indentation in there, which in effect makes this flange shorter because it goes along and dips down, comes back up. So we put enough of those in there, this will cause this flange to straighten out or shrink in size. So I'm just going to go ahead and do all of these and the other side, and then again test on the table and see if I have gotten it flat or still have a gap underneath. If I need to flute more, I can go back and squeeze a little further at those same locations. Again, we want to make sure that our bump goes down, not up. Otherwise, if the bump was raised, we'd have problems with our skin on top of it. In addition, we also need to deburr all of the sharp edges. And in these circles, we have quite a bit of sharpness if you just feel with your fingers. So I've been using my deburr tool, which has a swivel deburring edge to it. And I can take that and a few times go around, and that will knock off the sharp edge. And you can feel the difference once you have deburred it. It will knock off that sharp edge. And any other sharp edges we want to remove with our Scotch-Brite wheel or file. And that's what we need to complete for all of the ribs. Step 2, we're going to take 13 of the 14 left ribs that we just prepared, and we need to trim off the aft flange. I'm going to draw a line that connects these two straight edges, and that will be my line for trimming. And I'll go ahead and use my snips to trim this off. You can also use a shear like this to also make a nice, simple, clean cut. And what's nice about this is it doesn't leave any teeth mark because it doesn't have any teeth. And we'll clean this up with a file. In step 3, we're going to take 5 of the nose ribs we just trimmed and remove the upper and lower flange. I've marked inside where the cut line is to be, right there and right there. And I'll pull these out just a little bit to make it easier to get my snip in there and trim that right off. And once again, I think I will try my big scissors shears because that will get in there very nicely. And I left a little too much, so I can get back in there and trim just a little more off. And that makes a nice clean cut. And so I'll do that with the bottom and proceed with the rest. In step 4, we're simply going to trim off the same flanges at the front for the one left rib where we left the rear flange on. Step 5, 6, and 7, we're going to deal with the right ribs, the set of 14, and perform the same operations by removing the rear flange and the front 2 at the front on the appropriate right ribs as per our directions, just like we did the left ribs. In step 8, we are to simply cut apart the 2 hinge ribs and make a left and right from these. In step 9, we are to select a left and right nose rib, and the instructions tell us to choose one where we have trimmed the rear flange and the nose flanges off. And what we are to do is install 3 nut plates, 2 up here and 1 back here, and we are to dimple them first as well as the nut plates, and final drill the center hole to size 19 and install the 3 nut plates on each rib. In step number 10, we're going to do exactly the same thing with one of the right nose ribs. And here's step 10 with the 2 nut plates only installed. On page 1503, step 1 is going to have us straighten the main ribs by fluting as necessary, and as we can see, there's a slight bow in both of these flanges, so we'll flute gently to bring them nice and flat. They sit on the table, and we'll do this for both the left and right, all of the main ribs. Now in step 2, we're going to take 6 of the left main ribs and trim off the forward flange. Then step 3, we're going to trim off the forward flange of all of the right main ribs. In step 4, we're going to choose one of the trimmed left main ribs and cleco in the left doubler using the second row of holes to this edge row of holes here. So it'll look something like this. We'll cleco this in place, and then we're simply going to match drill the 10 other holes in the doubler into the rib. And then we'll disassemble and deburr. And step 5, we're going to do something similar with one of the right main ribs and the right doubler. We'll cleco this in place and then match drill the holes into the rib. In step 6, we're going to choose 2 of our main right ribs, and then we're going to go get our left hinge rib. That will go here, and actually our hinge bracket assembly is going to go on first, like that, and then our hinge rib will fit on top through the same 2 set of holes. We'll cleco those at those 2 holes, and then we want to match drill the rest of these holes into the main rib. And then we'll disassemble and deburr. And with it clecoed in place like this, we have 7 holes to match drill into the rib. And then we'll repeat that for the other main rib and the other corresponding components. In step 7, we're going to repeat the very same operation with a pair of left main ribs. In step 8 and 9, we rivet the doubler that we prepared previously into the 2 ribs where we match drill them into place. In preparation for page 1504, we have placed our left spar face up with the flanges face up on a pair of sawhorses, and we'll proceed with step 1, which will have us attach a main rib to the outboardmost L angle down here. This is a right main rib, which will attach through the pre-drilled holes, and we will cleco this on and then rivet. And note that the rib is attached to the inboard side of the L angle, and we'll go ahead and set our rivets from this side. Now we'll move to the next inboard L angle, where we're going to attach another main right rib. Now this rib, as our instructions ask us, is to use one that we drilled for the hinge assembly previously, where we match drilled the holes, and that will attach in a similar fashion at this location. We have 2 ribs attached now. Step 3 will have us attach 4 more main right ribs to the next 4 attach angles along the spar. And we will rivet these in place. In step 4, we're going to take the remaining right rib that had the hinge rib attached to it, and attach it to our next L angle. In step 5, we'll attach 5 more right ribs to the next 5 angles. Step 6, we're going to attach the left main rib with the doubler on it, and that will attach to the last L angle on the inboard side. And note that the flange is pointing outboard on this rib compared to all of the other ones we've installed so far. And there will be 12 places to rivet all the way across. In step 7, we're going to install the rear spar assembly, and this will fit on the ends of our main ribs all the way across. We will line up the holes pre-drilled with those in the end of our flange of the main rib. And our first step is to match drill 2 holes in this area into the flange of that number 1 rib. Here's a view from above. With the outer holes clecoed, we will match drill the 2 inner holes for step number 8. And I have it clecoed halfway down and then all the way at the end also. After match drilling those 2 holes, we'll remove it, deburr, and then reattach, and in step 9, rivet the rear spar assembly in place at each of the rib locations. So that's 3 rivets per rib, so we'll have a total of 36 rivet locations. For our next series of steps, we want to put the wing down flat, either on a table or, as in our case, we're using a set of sawhorses. And this will allow us access to the front of the spar as we attach the nose ribs. In step 1 on page 1505, we're going to select 5 of our right nose ribs, the ones that have their aft flange trimmed, and install them to the angles starting from the outboard and working inboard. These will attach right here. We'll cleco in place and rivet from this direction so our factory head of the rivet comes in this direction. And this will be the same for the first 5. In step 2, we attach 3 more nose ribs. The first is an unmodified right rib, in other words, the one that we didn't trim anything off of. Then in the next position, we have the right rib with the 2 nut plates that we attached. And then in the third rib, we add another unmodified right rib. When riveting these ribs in place, we have 2 areas that need to be riveted. We have the usual L bracket behind here that we're going to rivet into, and then we also have the flange that rivets into the spar itself. And I'm going to use my little wedge because it's a little hard to get the rivet gun in here square, and we want our rivets to be seated nice and flat. In step 3, we're going to add 4 more ribs, and these are going to be the ones with the forward trimmed noses, and they will attach to the next 4 L angles. Now in step 4, we're going to add 1 more rib, but this is going to be a left nose rib. It will be the one with the flange and the front nose trimmed off, and it will go right here. So the flange on this one is pointing opposite of all of our other ones. Now in step 5, we're going to attach 1 more rib. This will be back to our right ribs, but this one will have the nut plates installed and the aft edge trimmed, and that will go right here. In step 6, we'll attach with clecos and then rivet the front spar assembly that we previously created. And there will be 3 holes for each of the flanges of the ribs at the very front. And we'll go ahead and rivet. There'll be 3 rivets for each of the 6 nose rib flange attachments that we have. In step 7, we want to put one of these plastic bushings in each and every rib right down in this hole here. So we should have 14 of those to put into place along the entire structure. Step 1, we have the mounting plates for the stall warning assembly, and we simply want to drill out the mounting holes to their number 30 size, and the same on the other one. In addition, we need to countersink the inboard side, and if you look at your drawings, you'll see that this will be the inboard side, and we want to countersink the 2 holes just big enough to accept a small screw that will be flush mounted on both sides. Then in step 2, we want to countersink this hole as per our directions for the larger screw that will fit in there. And we'll first drill that out to a size 19 before countersinking. In step 3, we want to deburr all holes and edges. In step 4, we're going to assemble the stall warning assembly as per our directions. And we don't snug up any of the nuts too tight so that this moves nice and freely. Step 5, we want to take our terminal brackets, there's a left and a right, and remove these tiny little ears that we find down here and at the other end. Step 6, we want to take this template, now we're going to use the bottom part of it, and we're going to take a piece of the plastic, and this will go along the bottom. We'll clamp this together, and then we can drill out the holes at the bottom here from the template into the plastic. Then we'll use these slots from here to here to draw a line and cut the plastic at the angle prescribed by this. So we'll end up making 2 of these plastics from this template. And that's what it should look like when we're all done. In step 7, we're going to take this bracket and we're going to rivet on the plastic piece we just made at these 2 holes. And we'll pull the rivet from the other side, and we'll also put little washers over the rivet while we're pulling it. In step 1 on page 1603, we're going to make a 5-inch piece of wire. We're going to take a piece of 5-inch number 18 gauge wire, going to strip each end appropriately, and on one end we're going to add a ring terminal, and we should see the wire poking out at the very end right there. And we'll go ahead and crimp this on. On the other end, we're going to place a female spade connector and slip this on and crimp this. And we're using our ratcheting wire crimper. That gives a nice crimp. In step 2, we're going to head back to our wing and install the stall warning assembly onto this rib here, and this is the one with the pair of nut plates. And using these 2 holes, we can mount the sensor using the 2 holes and 2 screws right at this location. And on the bottom hole down here, we will attach the wire underneath the screw terminal and then tie it up. Notice the larger slot in the top that will allow us to pivot and adjust the sensor as necessary when we're ready to calibrate it. Note that the bottom screw has the ring terminal with the wire we just created, and the top screw has the slot, and this will allow us to adjust this or pivot the assembly as needed in our next step when we calibrate. In step 3, we're going to position the skin so that it wraps around the ribs, and in particular we have our slot in the skin where we can insert the tab of our stall warning switch. So we'll carefully cleco this in place and wrap it all the way around. With the skin in place, we can now test the micro switch for its actuation. The instructions show us to adjust the switch so that just the slightest touch will engage or turn on the switch. Now it's easy enough to reach underneath. There's an access panel. You can reach in there with a screwdriver and move and tighten the switch, rotating it in the slot until you get it just so that it turns on with the slightest amount of movement. And here's another view of it, and the access panel is right here where we can easily get a screwdriver in there and adjust the switch. And then once we get it, we will tighten the screw so that the switch cannot move, and we can then remove the skin. In step 6, we're going to take a piece of wire and cut it to 68 inches long, and then crimp on a female spade connector onto the end. In step 7, we will attach this wire to the normally open tab of the micro switch, without moving the switch, of course. And then we want to route the other end of this through the bushing of not just this rib, but every other rib all the way down the line. And then the other connection from before will go up to the common terminal, which is up here. And it exits out the end. On page 1604, in step 1 and 2, we want to pull a string through all of the grommets, the bushings in every nose rib, starting from the outboard end and passing it all the way to the inboard end. We'll tape an excess length of the string to the last rib. And this can be a fishing line or other string. We'll use this in the future for pulling wires for our lights. In step 3, we're coming to the inboard end of the wing, and we're going to attach a ring connector to the end of the wire that we fed through previously. And in step 4, we're going to create a 5-inch length of wire with 2 ring terminals at each end. In step 5, we're going to take the terminal bracket that we constructed earlier and insert 2 screws . And then we can take the wire we created earlier and attach it to the top one. And then we can place a nut around here to secure it. And then we can take this over to the inboard edge of the wing to attach the bracket. And here we're at the inboard end of the wing, and we have attached the other wire to the bottom screw. And then we can attach this to the end of the wing using the nut plates that we had installed here and here. And this will go right here, making sure we tuck the wires in place, and then we can attach this at the top mounting location. Here the installation is complete. Note our mounting screw here with the wire loop under it, and one screw down at the bottom. In preparation for installing the skins on the wing, we have prepared our table, so to speak, which consists of 2 sawhorses and 2 12-foot pieces of lumber. These are 2x6s. And then we need to cover the wood with carpeting or another product that will help prevent scratching when we place the wing skins on top. If you are going to install the optional lighting kit, then we should skip to page 4005. In step 1, we need to string another wire the length of the wing through the grommets and attach a ring terminal at the end. Keeping in mind this is the left wing, and things will be a little bit different for the right wing. The right wing has the landing light in it. The left wing has only the nav and strobe at the tip. So here's our wire for step 1 with the ring terminal, and then we are going to attach it with a screw, another screw through the center hole, and the ring terminal we just fed through on the other side, and then we can reinstall this. On page 1702, step 1, we have the wing upside down with the leading edge towards us, and it's overhanging our table by a few inches. This is our left wing. And now we're going to install our 1201 skin, which is the very inboard side. And we have a couple of spots to dimple right here before we proceed, so I'll let it hang over a little bit. And at these 2 locations, here and here, we're going to dimple so it matches the rest of these. And then we can cleco and rivet the skin in place. Of course, we have deburred all the edges and any holes prior to our final riveting. With every 3rd hole clecoed, we are ready to rivet. Now there is one area that will be a no rivet zone, and this is marked in your plans. And that basically includes this area right up here, and then the very last row of rivets where the next panel overlaps, and that will be at the very edge, up and down the last row along the edge. One suggestion for riveting a large sheet like this is to start in the center and rivet in one direction and then the other, and same with the width and the depth, starting at the center and working outward. That just tends to keep the metal stretched and pressed outwards. Now we're going to go to the other end for a different view and the next step. Now we're viewing from the tip end. For step 3 and 4, we will install the outboard bottom skin. Here's a view from the other direction, looking outboard. I have clecoed the entire sheet in place. Now, prior to clecoing the sheet, there is one piece of preparation you need to do, and that is to locate the hole right here and drill it out to the full size, because that is where the tie down goes through. And then after drilling that out, the sheet can be put in place and clecoed. And then we can go ahead and rivet. What we do not want to rivet are the inboard and outboard edges. We'll leave those rivets open. And then also at the back where the flaperon arm is mounted, there's 6 holes which we do not want to rivet either. Here's another look at those holes in the back. They're on each side of the slot. In step 5, we add the mid-wing skin. And we want to be careful with the stall indicator that we get that through the slot properly. Now we're ready to rivet. We will avoid the rivets along the very first row behind the leading edge, and the rivets all the way at the back where the aileron hinge comes through, just like on our previous sheet. With the mid skin all riveted, it's time to turn the wing over carefully, being careful not to injure the leading edge skins, which are of course still loose and unattached at their edge. Page 1703, step 2, we're going to cleco down our skins all the way across, and then we will rivet the prescribed locations. It makes sense to cleco the inboard section and then the outermost board section, and then the middle can be clecoed last because it overlaps the inboard and outboard skin. Once we're all clecoed, we can now begin riveting. However, we need to observe the no rivet zones. We'll take a closer look. We're looking from the inboard out, and going across, we don't want to rivet in any of this area. So we're only going to rivet from the bottom up to about here, all the way across, because we need to be able to lift this up when we're done for the next skin that we install. And here's another angle looking from the inboard on the left. We don't want to rivet any of this area here. We're going to start here and go across and go across. So nothing to the left over here at this time. And use your instructions. And we have our recessed rivets, our flush pulled rivets down along the front spar line. Here we have completed the riveting. Note that we left the upper portion just clecoed, not riveted. And the very last rib on the outboard does not get riveted either. Now we'll move to the rear, where we can attach the two hinge ribs to the back of the main ribs at two locations. In step 3, we're going to install the hinge bracket assemblies at two locations. We're at the rear spar, and we'll find two slots down at the bottom of the wing, right where these are supposed to go. And of course we have this piece here. I'm going to cleco and rivet that from the bottom. That's this piece here. And then this will slide up from underneath the wing through the slot and then sit like this, and it will get clecoed and riveted to the rib, to the bottom of the skin, and the back spar. There are some challenging rivets to pull here, the ones that are in the corner. You simply want to use your wedge to get into those tight corners. And if any rivet stem is in the way, you can also drill it out, one that is existing. Note that whenever possible, the factory head of a rivet should go on the thinner metal. And the rivets on the bottom, even though they're close to the hinge, using your wedge, you'll be able to get them in there very nicely. Page 1703, in step 4, we're going to install the upper inboard wing skin. I've left it in blue just for the moment to show how it fits in the front. There is a channel that fits into a slot in each rib, and by seeing this in advance, it makes it easier to install. Notice that we need to kind of rotate the skin up in order for that to fall into the slot because of the Z hook shape it has. So when we set this skin in place, we'll grab it and kind of rotate it in there so that it falls into each rib. And we have it all clecoed in position, ready for riveting. According to our instructions, we're not going to rivet the outboard edge, and we're not going to rivet the very front line, and the area in here will not be riveted either. Now we will repeat the operation for the outboard top skin. And when we go to rivet, we're going to leave this edge unriveted and the opposite edge undone, and the front, of course, because of that. And we'll rivet everything else. Now in step 1, on page 1704, we will install the mid upper skin. And that will go in this location. So after we prepare the skin, we're going to cleco and rivet everything in place except for the very front. Keep that for a little bit later. And we'll go ahead and rivet, just not rivet the very front up here, but everything else we'll get. And notice that this will tie in nicely with our inboard and outboard panels along the edge. Here's the wing walk doubler. And our first step is to dimple 3 holes. There'll be 1 here, and then there will be 2 down here. So we'll dimple them to look just like the rest of them in the rows, and then we'll go cleco this up for a trial fit. Here's a picture of the wing walk doubler clecoed in place. We have it clecoed around the nose, and this will show us that at the very edge we're going to need to bend it down a bit. As you see, the edge sticks out the bottom of the curve, so we'll need to bend that down for a little bit better fit. For putting a bend on the edge so that we get a little nicer fit when it wraps around, I'm using my tool that we used before on the tail cone and running it up and down here. Now it'll be a little bumpy with the dimples in there, but we still want to work it back and forth until we get just a slight bit of a curve at the end there. And that'll provide a nice fit when we put this back on. We started clecoing at the very front and around the nose and worked our way back. And we can go ahead now and rivet this along with the rest of the rivets for the inboard top skin. We can continue now to rivet, cleco and rivet all the way down the length and finish riveting all of the remaining locations. And also apply a small bend to the edge if necessary to ensure a nice tight fit by using our tool to bend the edge down slightly. And we'll be completing our riveting all the way down to the end, but will not rivet the very last rib and edge. That'll be left open because, of course, we have some tip skins to go on a little bit later. And here is the completed wing. Now we will move to the wing tip to continue our assembly. On step 1 on page 1705, we're going to take the handhold part and bend it into a couple of 90 degrees here, and then 90 degrees up here. And then we can go assemble this on the wing tip. Here we're at the wing tip. This is the forward end of the wing. And here's our handhold. that we just bent up, and it will attach right here. And there are 2 holes and 1 hole here already drilled into our spar tip, so I'll just go ahead and cleco this in place. And we can rivet at this time. And then to the rear of the wing, on the rear spar, we're going to add a tip rib. And this will be clecoed right at this location. There are 3 holes, and we can cleco that and then rivet in place. Part of step 2 includes installing this piece here. And this gets located on the other side of the wing, right at this location. I'm going to hold off for now until we flip the wing over, because we need to rivet that from the other side. And we're going to rivet this in place. We're not going to rivet the 2 end ones here and this corner one here as per our directions. We'll leave that open, but rivet the rest to the bottom of the wing. Now we're going to install the tip aft skin, and all the holes are drilled, and it will go just like this, and we'll cleco this in place. Now at the front part of the wing, we have a forward skin. It has this cutout for the handle and has this long piece here which will fold underneath the skin. And that will share the rivet line. And all the holes are made, and the thin piece will wrap around to the bottom, and we will cleco this in place. We can now go ahead and rivet the 2 sheets in place.
Yeah, you gotta do what you gotta do when it comes to your employment, you know? Yeah? Yeah. Yeah, right. How's she doing?
Now we can install the forward tip rib, which goes right along the edge. And here's the piece. Now it will follow just underneath. The holes will match up. If we put it in place, we see that it doesn't take the curve right here. So what we need to do is start adding flutes in between the holes, which will shrink and pull the metal in so that it will follow the curve. So I'll start adding some flutes until we get this to follow along nicely. Note the strip now follows a contour. I was able to do that by fluting each of these, by fluting in between the holes. I did that on both sides. And by just gradually fluting, starting from where the straight section is, all the way to the point where it starts having the built-in split. And by doing that, I was able to get a very nice fit. So I'll go ahead and cleco this in place, and I can then rivet this in place. Towards the rear of the wing, we have another tip rib. And that is this part here. And the holes are all drilled, and this goes in very nicely right here. There's actually a connection where we can cleco it here and then all along the edge. And this is a straight piece and does not require any fluting. We'll cleco that in place and rivet. With the tip ribs in place, we have turned the wing upside down. But first we're going to take care of a step we neglected a little bit earlier by preparing the access hatch halfway down on the bottom. Step 5 on page 1704, we want to prepare the cover and hatch opening on the underside of the wing. We need to add nut plates to all of the locations, and we also need to dimple the screw holes as well as the screw holes on the cover plate and rivet on the nut plates underneath so that we can attach this on. On page 1706, we're going to close off the wing tip area. Now we're going to use this part here, and this fits up very nicely. We can see where this sits, and if we line this up, we can see everything lines up very nicely. The tabs up here are what are going to need to be bent in order to match into the edge up here. Take a closer look. Each of these tabs will need to be bent slightly so that they can feed underneath the skin over here and line up very nicely. And in our directions, we have the angles to which we need to bend each of these tabs all around this area, and a small tool to help us bend these. We'll take a look at that next. Here's an example of the tool I made. It basically just has a slot, 9/16 from the edge, and then a 45, and we filed the nose to get a little bit of a radius there, so when we bend it won't be too sharp. And that's all we're going to do then, is use this to bend each tab to the prescribed angle. Following our directions for bending these tabs, we of course need to look up the angle that each tab needs to be set at. Many of these are simply set at 30 degrees, and one way I do that is by taking a small adjustable protractor and setting it to 30 degrees so I have an idea of what the angle should be. And I can also slide our material up along this and get it to match. So for example, for bending, let's say this tab right here, I'll take the tool, slide it over, push it all the way in, and then bend it up. And then I can take my protractor and slide it under and confirm that I have it pretty close to the correct angle. Obviously we can readjust these tabs when we go to final fit this, but the closer we get them to the directions, the better we will be. After bending the tabs, we can try for a trial fit. And it indeed fits very nicely with some just very minor adjustments. And we have one last piece that we've clecoed on in the corner here, and that will also get riveted to the top side as part of our final step. We can go ahead and rivet unless we're going to install the optional lighting kit, in which case we need to make an opening in this piece for the strobe and navigation light. The van includes a full-size template that will allow us to create the cutout in our wingtip for the light. So I've cut out the template with the scissors. I made a photocopy and cut it out. I'm going to line it up, and if you will notice, the actual rivet holes are on the template, and I can line those up with the existing rivet holes down here and the handle. And I'll go ahead and mark this after I pull the blue off, trace this out, and then I'll have the mark nice that I can go cut out. This is just an access hole. The fitting will go over this, so the hole doesn't have to be absolutely perfect in either size or position, but we'll get it as close as we can. One technique for cutting out an inside area is to make a series of holes with a drill. And then we'll go back and enlarge these holes, and I'm using a step drill bit. Makes it very easy. We can make them as large as we want, even larger than the ones here. And what this allows us to do is to take our snips and start cutting in between the holes. It looks like a big mess now, but that allows us to get in there and start trimming real nicely until we get the area out that we want. Always starting with the inside, not getting too close to the line, and then we can always go back and do a nice, neat job. And then with our rough edges, we simply take a file. We have reinstalled the sheet onto the wing, and now we can prepare the light extension, which is this piece of fiberglass. We do need to trim it on the scribe line. I used a pen to make it a little bit darker. And I'll just use my hand shears to trim this off and then sand down to the line. And this will eventually go in this area here. And here we have the extension all trimmed. And this will be located here. And then we can drill, as per our directions, into the wing. And if you notice, probably hard to see, but there are little indentations where the drill is supposed to go to make the holes for the rivets. And that makes it real nice. And also along the top. And the sequence of drilling is in the directions. Now I've used my pen to highlight the little dimples that were in the fiberglass and the scribe line. We're first going to use the bracket from the lighting, from the lamp itself, and drill the 3 holes that match up with the bracket. And then we also need to open up this area. That's where our Molex plug will insert through. And this can be created by simply drilling 2 holes the size of that radius at each end, and then cutting out the area in between the 2 holes. Before installing this permanently, we will wire our Molex plug, and it will pass through here. And this will get a Molex plug. We'll plug them together and then feed the assembly through here. And this slips on very nicely like this. And then a set screw at the rear ensures that this is kept in place by locking it, pulling it back. We have a couple of studs here that fit into the housing and hold that in place. And of course, left wing needs to get the red position indicator with strobe. The directions show a technique for sealing the fiberglass piece to the metal wing using fuel tank sealant, and we won't demonstrate that at this time. Also, for finishing along the top here, our wing is inverted, fiberglass, epoxy, and flux can be mixed up, and the directions talk about filling that in so that you get a nice fit. And those steps are outlined in the directions. We're not going to show that right here at this time. On page 1802, step 1, we are to make the actuation bracket. Now we're going to start with a piece of the stock extruded L, like this one, and cut off the proper length. And then, as per the directions, the easiest thing to do is to mark our cuts, but first drill a 1/4 inch hole so that we will get the built-in radius when we're all done, and then we can complete the cuts up to that hole. And here's the piece. Notice the nice round corner. That's because we use the drill to cut a 1/4 inch hole. And then we need one more cut as per our directions. And then the center will be where we drill a hole, and then we'll round this off nicely. I'm going to need to make this a little more flat at this edge because we want a nice flat surface there. And we have our hole drilled, and I'll go ahead and trim off the radius there. I just used a coin of the proper radius, about 3/4 of an inch. And I'll go trim that off and clean it up, make sure all my edges are nice and shiny and everything is smooth, and we will be done. And there's my final piece. As long as it's nice and shiny on all the edges, and we'll double check the dimensions. And if you had fun doing this, we need to make one for the opposite side. In step 2, we're going to make 4 pivot brackets. We start with the tie-down material supplied, and then using our bandsaw cut off the appropriate length. We're going to drill and tap as per our instructions. And there I've tapped the piece. I tapped all the way. You don't need to do that. You only need to go halfway, 1 inch. And then I removed the corner at the top, which was specified for saving weight. Easy way to do that is to clamp it to a block of wood like this, and then you can feed it through your bandsaw and clamp it securely first, and easy to knock off that corner like that. Now we need 4 of these, and then need to drill 1 hole in the corner as specified. Then we can test our rod end by screwing it in and making sure we have a nice fit. We don't want it sloppy in there. If you make the hole too big, that wouldn't be good. I drilled and tapped mine in a drill press to get a nice straight shot down the middle. And I did use a Q bit, which was slightly smaller than the 11/32. Step 3, we want to flute the inboard and outboard nose ribs. Now in the directions they will show you exactly where to put the flutes. One there, and one there. So we're just going to take our fluting plier and flute them like that. That will help them sit flat. And the two flutes here and here. And again, on a table we can verify that they sit flat by fluting them like that. Page 1803, step 1. We have the aileron spar, the counterbalance, a nose rib, and the aileron nose skin. And note there is a shape to this skin from front to back, top to bottom. Our first step will be to cleco the nose ribs in place, one here and then one down at the other end of the counterbalance, and then we will place the counterbalance on top of the nose ribs and then cover it with the skin. Now in step 2, we're going to drill through the pre-drilled hole in the skin right here into the tube, and there's a hole like this at the far end, very end. There's another view of that hole. And the other hole. And we'll use our number 30 drill bit. Prior to drilling, we want to make sure that the pipe is flush with the edge of the skin. When we've drilled our two holes, we want to take it all apart and deburr. In the next step, we're going to remove the nose rib, and then using the hole that we made in the end of the balance, we're going to rivet on the one hole on this flange right here into the hole on the pipe. Now we can bend this out, bend the tab out a little bit so we can get our rivet gun in there, and we want to go ahead and rivet this in place. And we're going to repeat this for the other side. And then at the other end, we perform the same operation. And in step 4, we cleco the assembly back together onto the spar along with the skin. Step 4, 5, and 6. We have re-clecoed the assembly back together. And now we need to match drill the various holes around the rib, and then also the holes into the counterbalance. We're drilling into stainless steel, so it's important to drill slowly and with pressure so that we don't ruin our bits. And so we will match drill all the way across and then down to the rib at the opposite end. And then we will disassemble and deburr everything. Now I cheated a little bit because I started the holes, then removed the skin, and took the tube over to a drill press where I completed the drilling, where it was a little easier to do. On page 1804, step 1, we need to separate these two pieces. And then in step 2, we're going to cleco it on to our rib. like that. And here's the finished part, riveted on. Now in the next step, we're going to cleco these to the spar, as well as attaching the brackets we made previously. We need to add the actuation bracket, which we made earlier, and I placed a bolt into the hole, and the idea is to install it here. Now we want to add our 10 washers in there so we get the proper spacing before back drilling through the holes. Got about my 10 washers on there, and I will actually screw a nut on the other side to hold it nice and tight. This will provide the proper spacing. I'll confirm that this is square, and then go ahead and drill and cleco through the back for the 6 holes there. Here's another view. I will clamp this and then back drill from the back of the spar. We will use a square to make sure we have these aligned properly. As in our next step, we're going to back drill from the spar, which has the pre-drilled holes, into the flanges and cleco as we drill. And of course we have one more of these pivot brackets down at the far end to our right. After drilling, it'll look something like this. And the last one near the end. We will now disassemble, deburr, and prime these parts we just drilled. And here it is riveted in place. The rivets were set on the back side, from the back side of the spar, and that worked out nicer because of the curved part in the radius would have created some interference if we had set the heads of the rivets from the front. In step 2, we're attaching the main ribs all the way across the rear of the spar, all except for the 5th and the last rib. We'll cleco these in place and then rivet. And now we will finish by clecoing and then riveting the final components. There'll be a nose rib at this location and the nose rib and bracket assembly over here. And the rivets for the nose rib are pulled from the rear. And we have the nose rib at station number 5. And then we installed the counterbalance. And the very last rib along with the counterbalance at the end. And we'll rivet everything in place. There is an inboard and an outboard skin, and these simply fit over the main ribs. And an outboard skin. And they will overlap in the center section. And we can cleco these in place. Now obviously I'm going to take off the blue covering, but it was a little easier to see this way. With both skins clecoed in place, we can begin riveting. One recommendation might be to rivet from the trailing edge, because one issue you may run into is that the trailing edge holes are opposite each other on each side of the aileron. This is the top. I set the rivet from the top first in the trailing edge, because what you'll find is when you go set the other rivet, they won't quite go down all the way because it's touching the nose of the other rivet. But while riveting, if you keep pressure downwards while pulling your rivet gun, if you're using a handgun, it will set down and seat. So it is obstructed at this point, but as you pull the stem and keep pressure down, it will set all the way down properly. I set the ones on the top first so that if I have any problems on the bottom and have to drill them out, it'll be on the bottom rather than the top. After finishing the trailing edge, I'll move forward. And of course, we're not going to rivet the area on the spar yet because our leading edge skin will overlap, but we'll do all of the ribs all along both skins. The top and bottom are now riveted in place, except for along the spar. We can now install the nose skin on the outboard end over the counterbalance. And we will cleco this in place and then rivet. The only place we don't want to rivet is down at the very far edge where the next nose skin will overlap. We can go ahead now and rivet the nose skin and just not rivet the very end over here where the next skin overlaps. Now the inboard nose skin can be fitted. Taking a closer look at the inboard nose rib, we note that there are many more holes in the skin than there are in the rib, so we're going to cleco up the holes we have and then match drill the holes into the nose rib. And then we're going to make sure everything is size 30, then we'll remove and deburr and then reattach cleco and rivet. Once the inboard skin is on, we can proceed to the center nose skin. And the hole for our tie rod end is located right there. And we can cleco this in place and then rivet everything up together. And when we're finished, we can turn it over and install the rod ends into each of the holes. And these will just screw right in to the dimension listed on the instructions. Now we have just finished page 1703, step 1, on our right wing. And this is a good time now to locate and create the opening for our landing light. We're using the right wing. We're at the tip of the wing, at the leading edge. So right in this area, between the two ribs, we're going to place our template, mark, and drill for the opening. Now we will take notice of the 3 holes on each side of the rib, and using our template we can in fact cleco in place the 3 locations that match up with those 3 rivet holes, and I will actually cleco this in place right through the paper, and the same with the other side. And this will provide the template for cutting out the landing light, as well as the holes for the screw holes and the rivet holes for the brackets, 3 on the top, and there'll be 2 down below. Now I'm going to position this for the top, mark this, and then I will take it off and reposition for the bottom using the 3 holes attached to the bottom. The template is now clecoed in place right into the actual holes, and I'm going to mark very carefully the little X here because this is the center of a 2-inch circle, and same with over here. I will drill a hole over here and then use a hole saw to drill at that location, and that will give me a hole in the metal and a hole here precisely located, because with 4 holes at each of these 4 corners I can then just use a snip to cut off the straight pieces that remain, and it makes creating the cutout very simple and easy. Here we have drilled our holes. And now we will reattach the template to the bottom 3 holes and cleco them in place. I placed the pattern back on, but this time I cut out the center section and then used a felt tip marker to mark on the aluminum where the cutout should be. Now I can go ahead and drill my 2-inch holes at each of those 4 locations and then proceed with finishing the cutout. A hole saw does leave a bit of a rough edge. Now this can be cleaned up with a file, but another technique is to use a step drill bit like the one shown here. Now they don't come in 2-inch diameters to the best of my knowledge, so if I were to do it all over again, I would use the largest step drill bit I could find and position it such that the edge of the step bit hole was right at the corner, each of the 4 corners of the part we wanted to cut out. And that would give us a clean edge, and then go ahead and use the snips to cut out the remaining part of the metal. In the next step, we're going to take the lens and insert it from behind and simply push it up into place until it comes all the way forward, and then we can drill using our dulled plexiglass bit into the 4 holes on the top and the bottom. And then we can remove it, and next we're going to put nut plates on these strips, and these strips will match up the holes that we drilled, so that we'll end up with a strip with nut plates matching up with the holes we drilled, so that we can use screws to attach the lens to the skin. We're going to enlarge these holes to our number 27 size and then dimple them so that we can use screws that will recess nicely into the skin and then into the holes and backing plate with nut plates onto the lens as per our directions. There'll be one of these backing plates on the top and on the bottom, and we're also then going to trim the plastic so that it's within a 1/4 inch of our opening as per our directions. And we'll use a cutoff wheel to trim the plastic safely. Here is the backing plate completed. Notice the flush rivets. So we dimpled the metal and the nut plates. So we made 2 of these. One will go on the top and one will go on the bottom. And here we have our lens all trimmed. If you use a rotary cutter, it's very easy to do and will cut very nicely. And also I opened the holes to the number 27 and countersunk them. And I had asked my helper to use a rotary cutter, and he in fact used a bandsaw, and you can see what happened. So I'm going to have to get myself a new lens and a new helper, but we'll replace this before flying. So our backing plate will fit nicely like this, one on the top and one on the bottom, and we'll use our screws then. Now I have also dimpled the holes on the top and the bottom, so our screws will go through the holes and then into the lens and the nut plates in the backing plate. Our next step is to prepare the 2 brackets. Now there'll be one on the left side, and they'll install on the top with these holes into these 3 holes. So this will fit inside here, and the other one on the other side will fit over there. So they'll be inside, 3 holes on the top and 2 on the bottom, and our light will go in between these. So I check the fit inside, and they fit very nicely. I cleco them in place, and then as per our instructions, we'll add a doubler, which gets riveted on here with flush rivets, and that's the slot that we'll use to attach the light, and then the light will go in between. Now here is the landing light in between the 2 brackets that we just talked about. We have a bolt and lock washer within the slot, and of course, whoops, I got this upside down. The 3 holes goes to the top and the 2 holes to the bottom, and this will allow us to adjust it. On the back, the wires coming from the light get male Molex pins, so we crimp those on. There's another 2 wires, I believe the green and blue, which we simply do not use at all. Those are for controlling a second light, which we're not using. And then on our bracket we have one wire attached as per the directions, and that goes into the other side of the Molex. So we can go ahead and finish wiring up the other Molex and install this into the wing. Now the two wires that come from the other end of the wing, the ones that we passed all the way down the length of the wing, they will each get 2 female Molex pins on each end, and we'll insert that into our Molex connector along with the one that comes from the ground off of the end of our mounting bracket. So these 3 will go together into our Molex connector.
It's even more compelling to hear them sung in her own expressive voice. The new album from Teresa Berg is called The Dreaming Fields. Reviewer Meredith Oakes is a DJ and talk show host with Sirius XM Radio. You're listening to All Things Considered.
I mean, she